Today's episode is sponsored by the Positively Living Co-working Club. If you're inspired by the topics here but struggle to take action, join us. The Co-working Club provides resources and accountability focused on doing, not networking. Obligers and introverts, this is for you. Get details and join for $20 a month at positivelyproductive.com/resources. In the face of grief, especially if the loss is new or severe, productivity is likely going to look different. It might be slower, more deliberate, more focused on the self-compassion part, not the accomplishment part. And that's more than okay. That's a gift to yourself and to others who may be looking to you to set the pace and manage expectations. It will help others understand what they can ask of you and what they can ask of themselves. You're listening to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zaratny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a productivity coach certified in positive psychology and stress management. Join me as we explore ways to live a more proactive, positive life with episodes on productivity, self-awareness, mindset, entrepreneur life, habits and systems, simplicity, fun, and more. I understand overwhelm personally as a multi-passionate entrepreneur, wife and mom to kids and cats, and as a caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Welcome to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and I'm especially grateful you've joined me today as we continue our ongoing conversation about grief. In multiple episodes of the podcast, we've discussed grief as a main topic as well as an experience that has informed our choices. We've defined it, dealt with it, decluttered around it, and learned to move on through and with grief, all of which are essential. If you clicked on the episode because grief is a topic that you want to explore and you'd like to listen to those other episodes, go to the podcast page of the Positively Productive website, positivelyproductive.com/podcast, and select the Grief and Trauma playlist. It includes the full collection of grief episodes as well as some trauma episodes, including our foundational trauma episode with Mallory Jackson, which is still to this day one of the most popular episodes since we began the podcast. I've also included my caregiver story episode because it's deeply connected to why I talk about grief and trauma in my work. As a productivity coach, I realize it can seem an odd combination to include grief in the mix. So it occurred to me I should share what that reason is and help us understand how we can live a productive life while grieving. In addition to the fact that acknowledging grief is a kindness, we also need to realize that it has a real impact on our productivity. It's always bothered me that we try to look at being productive as its own thing without considering all the aspects of our lives, when it couldn't be further from the truth. Life experiences don't happen in a vacuum. Even the things that are small that you think don't impact other areas of your life essentially do, because anything that impacts you impacts your productivity. Everything we are and feel affects what we do and how we do it. The reason I know this, especially when it comes to grief, is because I've experienced a number of losses over the years, including a very complex one involving my mom. She had Alzheimer's, and I watched over her while pregnant twice, and I spent my children's formative years experiencing extreme stress and grief that is very special to caregivers. I share more details in the Caregiving and Clutter episode, which is included in the playlist I mentioned. But what you need to know for today is that I grieved the loss of my own mother before she ever passed away, because Alzheimer's takes a person away from the world in pieces. I lost the ability to properly communicate with her and connect with her in the way that we used to. I lost the gentle way she was with us because she became agitated over time, understandably, and sundowning included her trashing her room each night. And I lost the sense of comfort of having a mom who could care for me, decide for me, and do for me. I also lost the hope of my children having a grandmother connected through me, though thankfully my husband's mother has been the most incredible one to my children for many years. I'm so grateful for that. All this to say, the sense of loss within that part of my life has been profound. After she passed away, I experienced a more traditional grief of officially losing my final parent. My dad had passed away 20 years prior. As we rebuilt our life, my husband lost his job, and then I grieved for him as a person, his confidence and his belief in what he does having been shattered by a company that, no cause from him, decided they needed to let him go for financial reasons. And then our financial situation shifted such that we were grieving about that as well. And not just the opportunities that our financial situation afforded us, but also staples of life, being able to pay our bills and put a roof over our head. At that point, we did everything we could, and the final decision had to be moving. So we moved away from the only home that my children had ever known. We had no choice, and I grieved for them and for myself because we left dear friends behind. Now, I will gently reassure you that this move did end up being one of the best things we could have done. It's one of those things that you can't know in the moment and you have to trust. But it's still important to acknowledge that feeling of loss and how it affected us, and even how it affected the choices that we made when we moved. Throughout this time, I still forged ahead, trying to help the family in whatever way we could. I became a professional organizer when I saw how healing it was. Decluttering can help you process grief, by the way. And I shifted to productivity coaching to reach the person first, knowing that the heart and the head are really what controls all this. And if we can get to that first, we can change the game. During this time, we loved, we lived, we worked through it all the best we could. I built a business, we made new friends, and we weathered a pandemic together, which is another place all of us have grieved. And during that time, I brought the Positively Living podcast into the world as well. But I still grieved, and I still do. I still had moments where movement felt impossible. So how did I get through it? I understood that grief was impacting my ability to take action. I could feel the exhaustion from so many places in my life, and I can still pinpoint when that happens. I came to terms with it and planned accordingly, taking into consideration my specific needs. And I moved ahead, figuring out what I could do in each moment and giving myself grace for what I couldn't. That's what I want to share with the world. That's what I want to share with you right now. If you take away nothing else, take that away. To focus on what you can do in any given moment and give yourself grace for that which you can't. How that grace, patience, and compassion turned inward is such an important takeaway. That, along with effective productivity techniques, is what has allowed me to live a productive life in the midst of so many losses and to, in turn, help so many others do the same. So let's review the concept of grief quickly and then go into what you can do. So grief at its core is the emotional response to loss. It's a natural reaction to things like death of a loved one, end of a relationship, or some significant change in your life that brings about a sense of loss. And this can include change that we welcome into our lives, choices that we made, things that we know are best for us. But there's still going to be a form of loss and a form of grief that goes with them. Grief can extend beyond sadness. It can encompass a range of emotions like anger, denial, bargaining, and acceptance. And if this sounds familiar, that is because those are the stages of grief according to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who shares those in her book on grief and grieving, which is one of my most recommended books if you are grieving. If you'd like to check that book out, I have an Amazon list linked from the resources page of the website, positivelyproductive.com/resources. Scroll down and look for a button that says frequently recommended books list, and you will find that and many others that we mentioned on the podcast on that list. So the impact of grief on productivity is profound. It's not merely about feeling sad or having a temporary dip in motivation. Grief can manifest as physical symptoms like fatigue, changes in appetite, and sleep disturbances, all which affect your energy. It can therefore impair our cognitive functions, making it difficult to concentrate, make decisions, or even remember simple tasks. Grief triggers a stress response in the body, further exacerbating its effects on our overall well-being and productivity. And if you've been listening for a while, you know that a stress response essentially removes our ability to focus properly, and that energy management is our key to achieving in the most efficient way. So this means that grief hits us from all angles. Now, the way I describe that, it makes it feel like maintaining productivity amidst grief is impossible. But it's not. Bear with me. It begins first with acknowledging the presence of grief in our lives. And of course, that's going to be to varying degrees. We need to recognize that grief is a natural part of our life. It doesn't mean we're weak. And if anything, it highlights our empathy and our ability to fully experience the highs and lows. You know, there's so much to it. There's so much impact. And we need to understand that. And not only understand it conceptually, but personally. You need to ask yourself, how you grieve. What do you do when that happens? And it, of course, will depend on the reason you're grieving. What areas of your work or personal life are most effective? And what do you do? What steps do you take to, quote, bounce back, if you will, or, find your way to a new normal or back to some kind of routine? What steps do you take in being resilient from this? Just as we respond to stressors differently, and therefore our stress responses are personal and distinct, so too we grieve differently. We as people grieve differently, and then of course we'll grieve differently depending upon the kind of loss. So all of this needs to be considered. And this is why we can't place a time frame on grief or recovery. We can't place rules on it. We need to have a personal understanding of what it means to us, how it's impacting us, how it's impacting others that we love, which therefore impacts us. And it's this understanding that allows us to tailor our approach to our routines and habits, which in turn helps us recover and regroup and rebuild. Planning our personal approach accordingly is crucial. We need to set realistic goals and prioritize self-care. Yes, you've heard that so many times from me, and you're going to hear it so many more times. It might mean seeking help and support from loved ones, therapists, support groups, and coaches can help too. I work with a number of clients who deal with grief and caregiving. It's about creating a plan that acknowledges the presence of grief in your life and then integrates it into your daily life. It's not a matter of working around it, it's a matter of working with it. Finally, as my youngest teen says, hear me out, this also may involve adjusting our expectations. We may need to reframe what being productive, yep, I did use air quotes on that. We may need to reframe what being productive is in our lives. I'd strongly encourage that regardless of whether you're grieving or dealing with something, because all too often we tend to measure productivity with someone else's ruler. Productivity is not always about doing more or achieving more. It's about doing what's right for you in the moment, and sometimes it's simply about getting through the day. Sometimes survival is where you take the W. It's about taking care of ourselves and allowing ourselves to heal. It's about recognizing that progress, not perfection, is the goal. In the face of grief, especially if the loss is new or severe, productivity is likely going to look different. It might be slower, more deliberate, more focused on the self-compassion part, not the accomplishment part. And that's more than okay. That's a gift to yourself and to others who may be looking to you to set the pace and manage expectations. It will help others understand what they can ask of you and what they can ask of themselves. I have helped clients time and again review their expectations and take a step back to give themselves breathing room. And at first, it can be hard, especially when you're a high achiever, because you want to get all the things done. And you can't fathom slowing down. Isn't that quitting? Isn't that failing? No. But once you realize that stepping back and creating that space for healing is a form of productivity, you'll understand why it's so important. And then what I love most about this holistic and compassionate approach to your habits, routines, and schedules is that when you figure out how to let go of what you really don't need to be focusing on and worrying about right now, limiting what you do and expect yourself to do, and then becoming efficient with what you do, you find that space you needed for grief can then become a wondrous space for other parts of your life too. More self-care, more celebration, more joy. Acknowledging and working with, not against, grief is not only a kindness to ourselves, but it's also the key to unlocking our productivity potential. If you're experiencing grief but still want to make the most of your life, it's time to approach productivity differently. And you are in the right place to do that. I encourage you to check out the other episodes and to connect with me. You can message me on social media or through the Connect page on my website. Whether you'd like to have a personal conversation through a free discovery call, or you'd like to share where you are through DMs, I would love to hear from you. Regarding that grief, my heart to yours, may that grief help you heal. And may you keep finding the light on your path. Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious and limited, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback, questions, or want to schedule a chat, head to positivelyproductive.com/connect. And if you are looking for any of the resources referenced on the podcast, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.